Good afternoon. I'm joined by Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald and the Speaker of the State Assembly, Jeff Fitzgerald. Pleased they're both with us here, and they'll be making some comments as well. It would be nice today if we could announce that we had an agreement for these 14 state senators to come back. But instead, we've got a letter from Senate Democratic Leader Mark Miller, a letter that says, in part, I would ask that you or your authorized representatives agree to meet with us near the Wisconsin-Illinois border. Now, it's interesting. It's addressed to myself and Senator Fitzgerald. We're both going to touch on this, but we need to walk through why this letter is so ridiculous. And I think it's important because for the last several weeks, both Senator Fitzgerald and my administration have been reaching out to reasonable senators, many of whom are very interested and willing to come back to the state of Wisconsin. And time again, the person standing in the way of making that possible is Senator Mark Miller. Senator Fitzgerald's going to talk about how a week ago he went to Kenosha to meet with several senators who were interested in coming back. He can fill you in on his discussions there. That was one of the many times in the past couple of weeks in which instead of holding press conferences and negotiating or appear to negotiate in the public, which Senator Miller and others have done, we've actually been trying to get the job done and have been reaching out to those senators who are interested in joining us back here in the state's capital to conduct the business of the people of this state. After that meeting, later in the week, we thought, okay, let's raise the stakes. So on Wednesday, I authorized members of my administration to travel to Kenosha to meet again with some of those same state senators who are interested in coming back, who have a sincere interest in coming back, and who are reasonable about their approach in terms of coming back. That night, they invited, and he accepted, they invited Senator Miller in hopes that after day after day after day of thinking they were close to coming back, only to find Senator Miller standing in the way of that progress, having him there might be helpful. So they met at the McDonald's in Kenosha. In fact, Senator Miller actually had some hot cocoa along the way with some of the other folks there. They had a good and lengthy decision, one in which created the framework for what we all thought was going to be a pathway hold. In fact, my staff was so optimistic about that. They literally called me at about midnight, woke me up on Wednesday night to talk through exactly what had been discussed at that meeting and to tell me they were optimistic that we were on our way towards coming home Thursday or Friday from those state senators. So we had progress. We thought we had the framework of a pathway home for those 14 Senate Democrats. But again, Senator Miller stood in the way. And Senator Fitzgerald, I know, has got some comments on that as well, but it really leads you to the question of who's in charge. When you literally have a meeting where reasonable senators feel like they've got an agreement with our administration, one in which we've kept both the Senate and the Assembly Republican leadership in the loop on in terms of what we were doing and the progress we were making, just as Senator Fitzgerald had earlier in the week, kept the three of us informed as to what was going on. Each and every step, it appears as though anytime there's some reasonable senators seeking to make and take action, again, the barrier tends to be Senator Miller. Even as late as this weekend, yesterday, I authorized two members of my administration to travel to South Beloit to go across the state line to do exactly what Senator Miller is asking for in this letter to be done in the future. We did yesterday. We actually did this. Again, we didn't put out a press release because we're serious about getting this done on behalf of the people of the state. People talk about negotiate. We've been doing it for days. The problem is we have a handful of senators who are interested in doing this, but we have Senator Miller who time and time again allows his caucus to stand in the way of the progress coming forward. And now I think the public has finally seen in the past 24 hours firsthand the frustration that we have felt for days in the sense that they were misled by the statements that Senator Miller made last night to a national media outlet when he said that the Senate was going to come back, and now today is reversing course on that. I think that's indicative of the fact that now Senator Miller is misleading the public, just like he misled us, and just like apparently he seems to be misleading many members of his own caucus. For us to move forward, we need to have reasonable and responsible elected officials stand up and decide it is time to set aside those who would stand in the way and instead figure out a reasonable pathway home, a pathway we've offered multiple times in the last couple of weeks and we're willing to continue to offer. I even had a discussion personally with one of those reasonable senators I called this morning myself on the way back from the tourism conference I spoke at earlier today. We have a path. We have a way home for at least some of those state senators so we can get a vote on this measure, and more importantly, we can move this state forward to get back to jobs, the economy, and our goal of creating 250,000 jobs over the next 4 years here in the state of Wisconsin. That's where we can work together on. That's where we've had success in working with many of these same Senate Democrats who've joined with Republicans here in the legislature to set a clear agenda that shows that we can get Wisconsin working again. But we've got to have leaders who are willing to stand up and stand in the way of those who are trying to block this from happening. And that's why this letter is just absolutely ridiculous, because time and time again we have met the very person who wrote this letter to myself and Senator Fitzgerald. Mark Miller is the person standing in the way of that progress, and we need to have a change so that we can move this state forward. Before we take some questions, I'm going to ask Senator Fitzgerald and then Speaker Fitzgerald to say a few words as well. Senator? No, we'll take questions in a moment after we each talk.
I've been in the building 16 years as a legislator, and I've been involved in many, many negotiations over the years. But I must say that one of the things you certainly have to establish before you negotiate is make sure you're negotiating with somebody that can actually deliver. And I think that's part of the frustration right now. When I drove to Kenosha and met with Senator Cullen and Senator Jauch, we actually started on the budget repair bill, and we discussed each item there. Some of them just working through what did this mean, how does it work, how would it work, and Senator Cullen took out his yellow legal pad and started to take notes. At the end of that 2-hour meeting, I asked them to forward those ideas to Director Lang at the Fiscal Bureau, and they did that. And there was a list of items that was created that evening that I reviewed the next day. It was then at that point that I brought the governor's office in on that list and quickly figured out that I needed to continue to talk to them. At no time did Senator Miller become part of those discussions. But what I really thought what I was doing was negotiating with those two senators to come back on their own. And they actually said, we will come back on our own. We'll bring a couple others with us. We think the magic number is about 5. That would be a safe number of senators that could return to the chamber, and then we'd have the quorum and we could move forward. By Tuesday, a promise was given to me that in fact was going to happen. And then on Wednesday morning, they didn't show up. So it became apparent to me that I needed to get the governor involved, and at that point we handed things off to the governor, in which he had his guys down there working with them all week. We have been negotiating. Just as late as yesterday, we were with the governor once again going over this list, continuing to figure out could we strike a balance so that our caucuses would still be supportive and be able to reach out to these Democrats and get them back. The problem is that Senator Miller is not in charge of the caucus. Senator Erpenbach is obviously doing media out of Chicago. You've got Senator Larson and Senator Taylor that are in Chicago kind of taking the role of the bomb throwers. You certainly have Cullen and Jauch that are negotiating, trying to get back, can't figure a way out of the box. And then you have Senator Miller, who's got his own plan apparently, and based on the letter that the governor and I received just this morning, either clueless to what's going on in the rest of his caucus or really is beholden to labor, who won't let him move in one direction or another. So it's the most frustrating process I've ever been involved in, because you really don't know who to talk to. You really don't know who can deliver. And at the end of the day, the only way to negotiate is to be able to lay out a list of items that are on the table, and we can't even get that far. So I'm frustrated by it. I think that, the time for them to be out of state and for, the institution to be kind of torn apart the way it is, that time has come and gone. And it's just, I want to make sure that people understand that, the Republicans have been willing to sit down and talk about these things and try and iron something out. I also want to be clear. This is beyond the budget repair bill. I mean, that is something that I've been saying since the beginning, that we're not flexible on that piece. But what I offered to these senators that first day when I met with them, I said, listen, we can do a motion in the Finance Committee that can address these items later on. And they agreed. They shook their head. Yeah, that's a good idea, Fitz. That's what we should do. So, the letter's frustrating. I don't know who's in charge. You don't know who to negotiate with. You don't know if labor's actually pulling the strings. You don't really know how to get this negotiation done. And I think that's something that's kind of been missing in the whole discussion.
Speaker?
Yeah, I will be brief because obviously the focus is on the Senate and not the Assembly. But I've been kept abreast of the situation and the negotiations going on and what we've been talking about. And, simply, I think the press story has been, and the Democrats' mantra has been that Governor Walker and the Republicans are not willing to move and not willing to negotiate. And I think you're seeing that that's simply not true. We are in those talks, have been in those talks. It is very frustrating to think that you have something in place and then it turns out that it's not. I can tell you from being minority leader last session that I never once had a one-on-one with Governor Doyle. And I can tell you, Governor Walker just in the past week has brought in the minority leader, Peter Barca, twice on this issue. So to simply be out there and keep saying that Republicans and the governor are unwilling to budge on this issue simply isn't true. So, I've had that call at, late in the night as well from the governor's folks bringing me up to speed on what was talked about. And, so we are looking to get something that can bring these senators back and get this state moving in the right direction again.
Just one comment, and then we'll open up some questions. I mean, the frustrating part, and I think both the Speaker and the Majority Leader have pointed this out, but what really is frustrating for us, but I think even more so for the people of the state, is that, again, you've got a handful of senators who want to come back. And day after day, whether it's been through my staff, my administration, or through talking directly with Senator Fitzgerald, you have a core group that wants to bring this forward, that wants to move forward, that wants to get this done. And it's almost like, and it may predate some of you who are a little young, but thinking back years ago when Charlie Brown and those specials, you'd have Lucy would hold the football and Charlie Brown would run up to kick the football. Well, time after time, Lucy would pull the football away, and that's essentially what Senator Miller is doing to members of his own caucus who are trying to be responsible and reasonable and bring us back home so we can get the job done here. He's pulling the football away. We need to figure out who it is ultimately we're negotiating with and find a way to bring at least some of these Senate Democrats back home to get the job done. With that,
Clarify what you mean when you say we're willing to negotiate. Because we heard kind of talk about it, then Senator Fitzgerald clarified and said, but we don't mean negotiate the budget repair bill. What do you mean when you say we are negotiating?
we have laid out on the table a series of things. What I've said privately matches with what I've said in front of all you in the public. So there's not anything I'm doing differently other than the fact that I haven't talked specifics in public up until now out of deference to the fact that we were actually trying to get something done, not just posture here. And so we've laid out things in terms of mechanics that are in the budget repair bill that, as the Senator alluded to, would be something that potentially, if it was worked out, would be addressed in the biennial budget process. The idea being that it's past the amendable state, but there are things that we could agree to, that the three of us and the people we represent could agree to be involved in the biennial budget itself, probably something that would be dropped in as a motion in the Joint Finance Committee. What I have said, and I said it again in multiple interviews last week, though, is we cannot sell out local governments. Over the weekend, a lot of publications, but one in particular, the Oshkosh Northwestern, ran a piece about how the superintendent there in Oshkosh pointed out the savings they'll get from this budget repair bill exceed the amount of cuts. And obviously I've talked about that over and over and over again. But they said, it wasn't just us saying it, they said that validated, yes, that was accurate. They come from changes in terms of overall compensation. They come from very modest changes for pension and health care contributions and other changes in terms of how those local governments can conduct themselves and run things. Savings that, for example, the federal government has because they don't have collective bargaining for wages and benefits amongst federal employees. But those issues, they said the savings exceed the reductions in state aid. So I said throughout this process, we cannot sell out the local governments. We cannot do what governors and legislators are prepared to do in other states across the country, where they're cutting billions of dollars from aid to local government without giving them the tools, not only the tools to save the budgetary, or to get the budgetary savings they need, but also, frankly, the tools that schools and others have to make their governments run better. And that's ultimately what this bill is about as well, is to make sure things run better, particularly at the local as well as the state level. So we can't undercut the local governments on that, but we can make adjustments in terms of the process and how things are done. We've offered multiple ideas out there. We've had great response from a number of these senators that have been involved. But again, time and time again, that analogy with Lucy pulling the football out kind of explains it all. Time and time again, when we think we have progress, when we've heard repeatedly saying, I think we're at a point where we can come back in a day, the day comes and goes. And I think many of us have questioned why that is, and increasingly it seems certain that Senator Miller appears to be listening more to the labor union bosses from Washington than he is even from members of his own caucus.
Could you give an example of something in the one of the items you're talking about in budget repair that you might be able to make an adjustment on?
Yeah. In this case, because we still, even as of yesterday, we had ongoing discussions about this. As I've said repeatedly, I'm not going to negotiate in public because we've given, our word that I would not identify things because I'm trying to give them some cover to discuss amongst their caucus what they can or can't accept. Once this is completed, I have no problem giving you the documents day after day, the emails that have gone back and forth, the discussions, because we've been discussing this in earnest. But again, the difference is, unlike Senator Miller, we haven't been doing it through letters like this. We've actually had people sit down and talk with Senate Democrats, at least those who are interested in actually doing something. And that's the difference here. I think the public's now seen it. After last night's online edition of the Wall Street Journal, they saw that Senator Miller told the public one thing. And then today, after he apparently got the phone call or whatever it was from the labor leaders from Washington, told him, no, you can't do that. You can't come back. You need to stay out, potentially. And we've heard, they've been out more than 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. I think there are some that are pushing Senator Miller to stay out up to the full 2 years. And again, I think for those reasonable senators, that's unacceptable. Jason, you...
You've said that the person that is holding this up now wants to talk with you. Why is that a negative thing? Why not sit down and talk to them?
Well, we've been talking. I talked to senators this morning, or a senator this morning. We talked to senators over the weekend. Our point is we're going to continue to talk to people who've actually shown an earnest interest in discussing this. Senator Miller joined some of those other responsible senators on Wednesday. They had a discussion where, again, I can't stress enough how well those discussions went, because think about it. Who would wake their boss up at 11:45 in the night unless they thought they had good news? They woke me up out of the dead sleep. I was happy to hear the news. I was excited about that. I got thinking through, okay, how do we bring this to fruition on Thursday? How do we get things done? Because what I've heard traveling the state is, while people understand full well why we need to do this to balance the budget, and the more they look at it, why we need to do it to protect our schools and our local governments, what I've heard more than anything are citizens across the state who say, I just want this done. I'm frustrated. They're just as frustrated as we are, and they want things done. And I think many of those Senate Democrats are frustrated. The problem is, we had that agreement, we had the process to move forward, and then it all fell apart because Senator Miller is standing in the way. We need to find out who in that caucus can really deliver, who can ultimately get something done. There's an interest in doing it. I think they really have to question whether or not Senator Miller is the right leader for them, or there's somebody else who can bring them home and get the job done.
Senator Erkenbach said that they were ready to return on Thursday and vote, but you held your press conference and that aggravated them, and then the rules were passed in the committee authorizing their arrest, and that is what balked the deal.
Yeah, right.
Well, on Thursday, I got that response from a couple of them. I have to contend, I think evidence has showed us, because if that was the only thing and now they were ready, but last night Senator Miller said he was ready. This morning he said he didn't. What happened between now and then? I don't know for sure, so I can only speculate, but I have to assume that some of those labor leaders who've invested millions and millions and millions of dollars from D.C. into this state got on the phone and told Senator Miller, you cannot budge. And that really makes me wonder who's making this decision. Is it the people in the state of Wisconsin, or the elected representatives, Republican, Democrat alike, from the state of Wisconsin who are making this decision? Or is it someone who's controlling money from Washington who's making that decision? And I think voters across the state have to seriously question that. Does anybody seriously think that the fact that I stood up here on Thursday and basically told all of you in the same tone, the same manner I'm talking about right now, what I said 3.5 weeks ago, which is if we're not able to achieve the savings from the modest pension and health care contributions that we're asking for effective April 1st, the alternative is 1,500 layoffs of state workers effective the first week of April. The first week of April ended last Friday. I foretold that. I've been honest. I've been straightforward. I've laid it all on the table as to what we were going to do. There's been no surprises throughout this process. If Senator Erpenbach was offended by someone standing up and speaking the truth, then we have far bigger problems than just this budget battle. The fact of the matter is we didn't make any threats. We didn't make any things that we didn't say we weren't going to do 3 weeks earlier. The fact is that something else is happening, because it's happened time and time again. It happened after Monday's meeting. It happened after Wednesday's meeting. It happened after Thursday. It happened after discussions again on Friday. We set up a meeting on Saturday. We had the meeting yesterday on Sunday. I had a call again this morning. Anyone who doesn't believe that we haven't been willing to reach out just isn't following the timeline out there, and there's no disputing it. There's plenty of folks, when push comes to shove, and frankly, when you all look at some point when the emails are released and everything else is out there, you can see the paper trail of day after day after day talking about our discussions, talking amongst the three of us about how we were optimistic and excited about the fact that it looked like we had progress, only to have that be cynically undermined by the fact that Senator Miller stood in the way of that progress.
Governor, if you won't say what are these items that you're willing to negotiate, how are people supposed to believe that you're willing to compromise when you're saying you're still need to give local governments these tools, you won't back off collective bargaining, and the Democrats say that's the only thing they're willing to negotiate about?
Well, that's not what the Senate Democrats we've been meeting with are saying. That's not true at all. And again, and maybe later today or at some point after they get another chance to look at the latest proposal, we'll release all those, because the facts will clearly show that we have put idea after idea on the table, and there's been give and take. Those reasonable Senate Democrats have given us ideas back. We've gone back to them, back and forth on it. But they've acknowledged, they understand. They don't necessarily have to agree with it, but they have acknowledged repeatedly that they understand why. They may not agree with it, they're not going to vote for it, but why we made the changes we made to make sure local governments didn't lose out on the chance to get their savings. But there are other things out there that, again, go to the mechanics of the process. But we've tried to honor this all the way through. Once they get their chance to discuss it today, then maybe that's the right time to lay the proposal out there. But the timeline of this is we've been reaching out for some time. It really hunkered down this past week where the senator went to Kenosha, where I sent my team back to that McDonald's in Kenosha for multiple hours of meetings, where we had multiple discussions back and forth in email and calls on Thursday, on Friday. We set up a meeting on Saturday, and I literally sent my team to South Beloit in deference to say, we'll keep you out of the state of Wisconsin. This isn't some trick or anything else like that. We're that serious about getting this to completion. And I put another call in today to figure out what exactly is going on. And it just seems so apparent to everybody we talk to that the person standing in the way, again, is the person who, instead of actually giving us something to work off of, is putting out a press release trying to redirect attention away from himself. The fact of the matter is Senator Mark Miller is firmly standing in the way. We are just as frustrated as the people of the state are, and the rest of those Senate Democrats need to decide if some other group or some other individual is going to step up and find a way to lead them home.
One more question. Will you keep going down there for meetings, or you said this letter is ridiculous, but will you go meet with them?
We have been. I mean, that's the irony is, if he'd actually check it, well, we'll continue, whether it's meet in person. Heck, we had emails all yesterday afternoon. I called one of these senators myself. It could be not more abundantly clear how serious we are about getting this done. I personally picked up my cell phone and called right around the corner as you come back from Wisconsin Dells on the way back to Madison. I called that one of those senators who's been reasonable about this process and talked to him myself today. The problem is this letter comes because he's not checking in with the rest of his caucus. You've got people of goodwill, people who are just more frustrated than they've ever been frustrated in their life, not with us, but with their leader, who fundamentally want to get the job done. And again, we're trying to empower them to say, yes, okay, instead of just talking about this privately, we are willing to work with them on a way back, but they've got to have a leader who's actually honest about finding the way back, who doesn't want to just put out press releases and letters and then stay there for the next 2 years, who actually wants to come back home. That's what the people of the state demand. Thanks.
Thanks.